Hey, what's up guys? So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at a dash cam that's specifically designed to help you capture important details like license plates. Now, in some earlier videos, we took a look at the design of dash cams and why they kind of struggle with capturing some details like license plates. We also took a look at police-specific license plate reading cameras and how they're designed differently than our dash cams. Specifically, a lot of times they have not just one, but two cameras. They've got your wide-angle view to capture the entire road ahead of you, plus they have a second telephoto camera that zooms in to capture details like license plates. Now, realistically for us, 90% of the time, your traditional dash cam is going to be able to capture most everything you need. They're going to be able to record who was at fault in case of an accident, for example, and you can send that video over to police and to insurance. You can prove, for example, that maybe the other driver was the one who ran the red light. And the dash cam can also be useful while you're parked, for example, in case of, say, a hit and run, and somebody hits your car and drives away, or if maybe somebody keys your car while you're gone. That said, there are going to be situations where you really want to capture the license plate of the car up ahead of you, and in some situations, yes, a traditional dash cam is definitely going to struggle with that. You may run into limitations due to motion blur or dynamic range, or maybe the license plate is just too far away for your dash cam to capture it. Now, as a proof of concept, I did some testing with the Nextbase 622GW and its rear-facing camera. It has actually a telephoto camera that's designed to point out the back window and record everything back behind you. And for testing purposes, we were like, hey, what if we take this camera and just kind of flip it around forward? Now, it doesn't actually fit when you do this, and I know a lot of you guys in the comments just mentioned, why don't you get like an HDMI adapter that just lets you rotate it? Great suggestion, but it's actually mini HDMI. I didn't mention that in the previous video, so most of the adapters don't work. You can get some cables to mount it, but then you run into issues with like, where do you mount this? Do you stick it to your windshield, or do you like stick it to the dash cam or something? So mounting becomes kind of an issue. As a proof of concept though, it did look promising nonetheless. Now, there are people who've been experimenting with this kind of stuff for years, and typically what they're going to do is they're going to get something like a dedicated action camera, say the Mobius Actioncam, and then they'll buy an aftermarket telephoto lens and attach it directly to the Mobius. And overall, what people are finding is that it works pretty well in the daytime, but it struggles more at night, which is pretty typical. But one of the nice things of having a standalone option like this is you can pair it with whatever traditional dash cam you want to add in the telephoto capabilities. Now, I've been curious about finding like the simplest option available, something that just works out of the box and you can stick on your windshield and plug it in and go. And in my last video, a couple of you guys mentioned the Cansonic UltraDash Z3 Standard Edition. And so I bought one and I've been driving around with it for the past month or so. It comes with not only your traditional wide-angle lens like this, but also a second telephoto camera that's designed to zoom way in and capture details like license plates. There's also the Z3 Commercial Edition, which swaps the telephoto for another wide-angle lens that records the inside of your car for like Uber and Lyft drivers, for example. But for the Standard Edition here, the second lens is actually designed to be the telephoto facing forward. It is a rotatable lens like this, so you could point it backwards if you want and record back behind you. But again, I want to test it as a license plate capturing camera. You can basically just stick it on your windshield and use the LCD on the back of the camera to make sure that both lenses are aimed exactly where you want. Now, both of the 1080p cameras rely on the Sony IMX307. This is a pretty low-end image sensor that's used in a lot of inexpensive dash cams, and so we're not going to expect, high-end video quality or anything. But this second telephoto lens here is really what caught my eye. Now, the dash cam itself, it's actually pretty huge. It's about the size of a cell phone. And so for that reason, I actually mounted it over on the passenger side so it wouldn't block so much of my visibility while driving. Additionally, it's also got this green shell, which kind of attracts attention. I prefer a more low-key and stealth dash cam design, but if you wanted to, it's got a quick-release magnetic mount, which does make it easier to take the dash cam on and off if you don't want to use it for, say, parking recording. And while I do like the fact that the power cable actually plugs into the mount and passes through directly into the dash cam, I do find that there's some compromises in terms of image quality and vibration, which we'll get into. And so my big question here, obviously, is like, well, how much does this second telephoto actually help in practice? Well, I found that it can definitely be helpful in some situations, but the results can be a little bit hit or miss. Now, most of the time, if something happens where you want to capture the license plate, say a hit and run, for example, it's going to be really close to your car, and so the wide-angle lens is going to be able to capture that plate. However, there are some situations where it can't do that, and so the telephoto is going to give you a second shot at capturing the plate, and often with less motion blur across the frame. And this is really the biggest benefit that I found here with this telephoto. That said, there's a number of other ones that I've seen too. For example, sometimes windshield reflections can be an issue, especially if you're not running a polarizer, for example. And so the telephoto can help as an additional camera angle as well to capture any important details that the wide angle may not be able to see. Now, when it comes to nighttime recording, if your headlights are not shining directly on the license plate, both cameras are going to be able to capture the license plate, but there's many situations where the headlights are aiming directly at the reflective license plate, and so it's too bright for the sensor to capture. And I found that there's some situations where the telephoto may be able to capture the plate when you're still farther away, for example, before your headlights are actually aimed directly at the plate and that overexposure happens. Now, when it comes to capturing license plates of cars that are driving towards you, again, there are some situations where the telephoto can capture the plates where the wide-angle camera will miss it. That said, there's also many situations where even the telephoto can't capture it either. The main idea, though, is that, again, it's just going to increase the likelihood of capturing the license plate, assuming, of course, that that car has a front license plate in the first place, which obviously doesn't apply to every area. Now, taking a quick step back, though, how important is this in the first place? Well, we're not cops. We're not trying to record the license plate of every car on the road. It's primarily in case something happens, like, say, a hit and run, for example. If one car clips you while going by, that's a situation where you really would want to capture the license plate. If you're running a rear camera, then hopefully your rear camera can capture the plate. Every car is going to have a plate behind it. Usually the rear camera is not going to have the same level of video quality as the primary front-facing camera. And so again, this is where that second telephoto comes in as like an extra camera angle and extra layer of protection. Additionally, that telephoto can also make it easier to record the driver in the car as well, which can be useful in case maybe they were distracted while driving. If you got into an accident and you were able to see that the other driver was texting on their cell phone, for example, or busy putting on makeup or something, it could also be useful in case of a situation like road rage, again, to record the other driver. Additionally, I've also found that it's easier to use the telephoto when trying to identify the make and model of different cars. For example, taking a look at the video here from this wide-angle camera, it's kind of tough to identify the brands of cars going by. But if we switch to the telephoto then, you can take a look at the grille and see that, hey, the first car, it's a Nissan. And then the SUV behind it, well, that's an Acura. Additionally, if you've got that second telephoto lens to capture details, well, then you can take your first primary dash cam and actually make it even wider to capture a wider field of view. This can be useful to better record things kind of going off to the side of your car, or to capture traffic lights up in the air and prove that you didn't run a red light, for example. Now, the wider you go here with this lens, the more distortion you're going to introduce, and also the tougher it's going to be to make out any smaller details like license plates. And so again, that's kind of where the telephoto lens comes in to compensate for some of the trade-offs that you're going to get with the wide angle. Additionally, that telephoto, it's just useful for capturing things farther away, beyond just license plates and whatnot. For example, I've seen a lot of videos online of different accidents or close calls where they actually happen farther away. And then the driver with the dash cam will wind up pulling over to help the people who actually got into an accident and take that video footage and hand it over to the police and to insurance. Well, again, that telephoto is just going to make it easier in those situations to actually capture what went on farther up the road. Now, besides all of the important stuff like capturing accidents and whatnot, it's also useful in case just something interesting happens on the road. For example, the other day I was driving down the road and I saw a bunch of skydivers up in the air, and so I took the dash cam and I kind of aimed it toward the skydivers, but the wide angle wasn't able to capture them because they were so tiny and farther away. However, when I switched over to the telephoto view, that camera was able to capture all the skydivers in the air, their parachutes, etc. And even though both dash cams were recording at 1080p, that telephoto lens made a big difference. Another example is when one of those planes were actually coming in for landing, and they basically buzzed the traffic ahead of me, flying super close to the ground while landing at the airport. That was really cool to see, and if I wanted to zoom in even closer, I could switch over and take a look at the video from the telephoto, and you could see just how close the plane got to the cars ahead of me. And so overall, I've found that having the second telephoto lens can be pretty cool. It can be pretty useful in practice for a variety of reasons. Now, is it perfect? No. Are there some trade-offs? Definitely. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the downsides next. Now, besides the issue of having a physically larger and bulkier dash cam in the first place, realistically, there's also many situations where even the telephoto lens simply can't capture license plates. Yes, of course, in some situations, of course, it definitely can, but there's also quite a few situations where it can't. Sometimes maybe there's too much motion blur for even the telephoto, or maybe you're driving around closer to dusk and so there's less light. And driving around at night, it's especially tough with the dynamic range limitations, plus having even less light than in the daytime. And so trying to reliably capture license plates at night is going to be really tough. But again, that's pretty typical too. I've also found that vibration from the road is going to get magnified when you're using the telephoto, which can make the motion blur actually even worse. Plus, the mount itself can introduce some vibrations even when you're stationary, and so you're going to get this kind of weird jello effect in the video due to the rolling shutter. Then watching the video clips while you're driving around, especially while turning, can be a little bit hard to watch, but really this telephoto here is just there to capture the details. The wide-angle lens is going to be your primary overall view to capture what's going on the road. Now, the biggest limitation I found here is that while they have made a hardware change, of course, to add the second telephoto lens, I feel like they haven't made all the software improvements that they need to. There would be some really useful kind of exposure optimizations that they can make, and I've talked about this again in previous videos. Things like getting faster shutter speed to freeze frame that action, or even maybe doing things like variable exposure to really try to capture the license plate details. Now, the website for the Dashcam does mention HDR, which is a pretty common feature these days, and I definitely think that HDR would help, but I haven't seen any sort of HDR effect in the video that I've noticed, and there's also no HDR or WDR type option in the settings. It basically seems that what they did is they just kind of slapped a telephoto on the side and called it a day. They didn't also do the additional software improvements that you could do to really optimize things here to capture license plates. And so as far as kind of additional improvements that you could do, well, I guess a manufacturer could do to really optimize something like this. First, I'd like to see something kind of like this, but maybe smaller and more compact to put up on the windshield. Second, this Dashcam was released back in 2020, and since then there's been newer image sensors with better video quality that have been made available, and so I'd like to see that introduced as well. Third, this mount here. While the suction cup is pretty convenient for installing and the quick release mount makes it pretty easy to mount and unmount the Dashcam, it does kind of introduce some additional leverage and vibration into the camera, which does then get magnified by the telephoto. So for the sake of having kind of like a solid, clear video, I'd love to see a shorter and more stable mount. And then finally, I'd really like to see some additional software optimizations specifically designed to help that telephoto camera better freeze frame license plates even when there's motion going by or things are really bright or really dark. Now, all that said, the general consensus that I've seen from people who've been running telephoto dash cams in their car for a couple years now is that they really like them and they wouldn't want to go back to just a single wide-angle dash cam in their car. And after running one in my car for the past month or so, I can definitely appreciate why that's the case. Now, for widespread adoption, I think it would be important to make this whole thing as easy as possible. Whether it's like a single dedicated telephoto dash cam that you can then pair alongside any traditional dash cam that you want, or if you want to do something integrated like this and just kind of build an all-in-one unit that you just stick on your windshield, plug into power, and get it aimed, and then you're good to go. Now, luckily these days, it's getting more and more common to have multiple camera angles with multi-channel dash cams. 3-channel dash cams are becoming pretty popular these days. The typical setup would allow you to record the front, the rear, and the interior of the car. Now in my car, I run a 4-channel setup. I've got 2 separate 2-channel dash cams to record front and rear and left and right, all on the outside of my car. Then there's Thinkware, who now has a special multiplexer box available that allows you to record up to 5 dash cams in your car. And typically all these multi-channel dash cams are designed to add additional camera angles that you don't already have, but if you wanted to, you could totally design a dash cam where one of these camera angles is specifically designed to be that telephoto aimed up ahead. Yes, it's a second camera angle that technically you already have, but it's designed specifically to help kind of address one of the weaknesses of your traditional dash cam, which is that for capturing details farther away, like license plates, they are going to struggle because they're optimized for your wide-angle view. That's really where this telephoto comes into play. And so, yes, while your traditional dash cam is still going to capture what you're going to need for 90 to 95% of the situations, there are still times when I really do think that this additional telephoto can certainly be useful. And so for that reason, if this idea kind of catches on, perhaps we'll start to see more and more dash cam companies who introduce the second telephoto lens pointing forward, just like we're starting to see an added interior-facing dash cam to record the inside of the car. And so, yeah, these are just my thoughts after spending the last month testing a dash cam that has one of these telephoto lenses. But down in the comment area, let me know kind of your thoughts. Do you think this would be useful? Do you think it would be helpful? Would you like a dash cam that actually has a second or third or fourth, whatever, an added camera angle, specifically the telephoto, to capture everything going on up ahead of you? And then finally, if you'd like a recommendation as far as which dash cam to pick up, I'll have a link down in the video description to my dash cam buyer's guide that goes over my personal favorite dash cams currently available on the market. And so, yeah, with all that said, thanks so much for watching. Hope you're all doing great, and I'll see you in the next video.